The crack of a hand against flesh echoed through the small cabin as Hannah Gardner stumbled backward, her cheek stinging from her husband's blow. Tears welled in her eyes, not from the pain she'd grown accustomed to that, but from the crushing weight of knowing this would be her life until the day she died. Montana Territory, 1878, was unforgiving to women with nowhere to go, especially those married to men like Victor Gardner. "You burned the damn biscuits again," Victor snarled, his face contorted with drunken rage. "Can't you do anything right, woman?" Hannah kept her eyes downcast, having learned long ago that looking at him directly during these moments only provoked him further. "I'm sorry, Victor. The stove was running hotter than usual." "Excuses," he spat, grabbing her arm with such force that she knew tomorrow there would be 5 perfect fingerprints bruised into her skin like all the others that marked her body. "Always excuses with you." Hannah had been Mrs. Victor Gardner for 3 years. At 22, the daughter of a failed farmer, she'd seen marriage to the prosperous cattle rancher as her salvation. Now at 25, she knew better. What had seemed like decisive confidence in the 35-year-old man had revealed itself as a vicious need for control, fueled by whiskey and an unquenchable anger. "I'll make fresh ones," she whispered, trying to pull away. Victor's grip tightened. "Too late for that. I'm heading to town. Don't expect me back tonight." The implication hung in the air. He'd be at Miss Lottie's place, spending their money on whiskey and women while Hannah nursed her wounds alone. When he finally released her, Hannah rubbed her arm, already feeling the tender flesh beginning to bruise. The door slammed behind him, and she sagged against the kitchen table, allowing herself a moment of weakness before straightening her spine. Tears wouldn't help her situation. She moved to the window, watching Victor mount his horse. When he disappeared down the trail toward Promise Creek, she crossed to the small mirror hanging by the door. A red mark bloomed across her cheekbone, soon to darken to purple. She'd have to wear a bonnet pulled low when she went to town for supplies tomorrow. Hannah sighed, touching a reflection. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, eyes dull, mouth set in a permanent line of resignation. When had she lost herself so completely? That night, alone in the bed she shared with her husband, Hannah made a silent promise. This would be the last bruise Victor Gardner would ever leave on her body. One way or another, she would find a way out. Dawn broke over the Montana hills, washing the landscape in gold. Hannah had barely slept, her mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. A woman alone had few options in the West. She had no family to return to, her parents having died of fever 2 winters past. Running away meant facing dangers possibly worse than Victor's fists. Still, as she dressed carefully in her blue calico dress, high neck to hide the bruises on her collarbone, she felt a resolve hardening within her. She covered her marked cheek with a light dusting of powder from the small tin she kept hidden in her sewing basket, then pulled on her bonnet, adjusting it to cast shadow over her face. The ride to Promise Creek was mercifully peaceful. Victor wouldn't be home until late, if at all, today, giving her precious hours to herself. The small frontier town was beginning to stir as she hitched her mare outside the general store. Mr. Peterson nodded to her as she entered, his eyes lingering a moment too long on her concealed face. "Morning, Mrs. Gardner. What can I get for you today?" Hannah handed him her short list: flour, coffee, sugar, and a few other necessities. As he gathered her items, the bell over the door chimed, and Hannah tensed instinctively. Well, look what the cat dragged in. came a familiar voice that made her stomach drop. It was Lyle Harmon, Victor's drinking companion and the foreman at the neighboring ranch. "Mrs. Gardner, out all alone? Where's that husband of yours?" "Good morning, Mr. Harmon," Hannah replied stiffly, not turning to face him fully. Victor had business in town. "Business? Is that what they're calling it these days?" Lyle chuckled, stepping closer. He was certainly conducting plenty of business at Miss Lottie's last night, still there when I left this morning. Hannah's cheeks burned beneath her powder. The humiliation of having everyone know how her husband spent his nights was almost as painful as his fists. "Your total comes to $4.50, Mrs. Gardner," Mr. Peterson interjected, mercifully drawing attention away from her discomfort. Hannah reached for her reticule, only to feel her heart sink. In her haste to leave this morning, she'd forgotten the money Victor kept locked in his desk drawer. She had only a few cents with her, nowhere near enough. I seem to have forgotten my money," she stammered, embarrassment washing over her. "I'll come back tomorrow." "Put it on the Gardner account, Peterson," came a deep voice from behind her. "I'll settle it." Hannah turned to see a stranger standing in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of a summer storm. He wore trail-dusty clothes and a worn leather vest, a gun belt slung low on his hips. A cowboy by the look of him, though not one from any of the local ranches she knew of. "That's not necessary," Hannah said quickly. The stranger stepped forward, placing coins on the counter. "I insist, madam." "Who might you be?" Lyle demanded, his tone carrying the territorial aggression of a man who considered himself important in a small town. "Ethan Northrup," the stranger replied simply, his eyes never leaving Hannah's face. She realized with a jolt that her bonnet had shifted, revealing part of her bruised cheek. His gaze lingered there a moment before returning to her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Just passing through?" Mr. Peterson asked, bagging Hannah's purchases. "Looking for work, actually," Ethan replied. "Heard the Blackwater Ranch might be hiring." Lyle snorted. "Blackwater only hires men who know which end of a horse is which." "Then I should be fine," Ethan replied evenly, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. He turned back to Hannah. "Allow me to carry these to your wagon, madam." Before she could protest, he'd gathered her packages and held the door open. Hannah followed, keenly aware of the eyes watching them leave. Outside, the morning sun had climbed higher, warming the air. Ethan placed her goods in her small wagon, then stepped back. "Thank you, Mr. Northrup," Hannah said quietly, "but I can't accept your charity." "Not charity, madam, just common courtesy." His eyes drifted again to her cheek, and Hannah instinctively adjusted her bonnet. "Been riding long?" he asked, changing the subject. "About an hour. Our place is east of town." Ethan nodded. "Gardner Ranch, then. I passed it on my way in. Seemed like a good spread." "It is," Hannah replied, though the words tasted bitter in her mouth. Nothing good came from that ranch anymore, not for her. "Well, Mrs. Gardner, it was a pleasure. Perhaps we'll meet again." Hannah climbed onto her wagon seat, gathering the reins. "Perhaps. Thank you again, Mr. Northrup." As she drove away, she couldn't help glancing back. Ethan Northrup stood where she'd left him, watching her go, his tall figure silhouetted against the morning sun. Something about his quiet strength and the kindness in his eyes stayed with her all the way home. Hannah had just finished putting away her purchases when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart leaped to her throat. Victor rarely returned before sundown when he'd spent the night in town. Peering through the window, she felt a rush of relief, seeing not her husband, but the cowboy from town. She stepped onto the porch as Ethan Northrup dismounted. "Mr. Northrup, is something wrong?" "No, madam," he said, removing his hat. "I wanted to make sure you got home safely, and to return this." He held out her handkerchief. "You dropped it at the store." Hannah took the small square of embroidered fabric, noting it was one she'd worked on during the long, lonely evenings. "Thank you, though you didn't need to ride all this way." "I was heading this direction anyway. Like I said in town, I'm looking for work." His eyes met hers directly. "Mrs. Gardner, I hope you don't find me forward, but—" He hesitated, then seemed to make up his mind. "That mark on your face, and the ones on your arm." Hannah's hand flew to her cheek, and she instinctively tugged at her sleeve, which had ridden up to reveal fingerprint bruises. "I'm clumsy," she said automatically, "always bumping into things." Ethan's expression remained gentle but unconvinced. "My ma used to say the same thing, until the day my father's bumping killed her." The blunt words hung in the air between them. Hannah felt her carefully constructed defenses begin to crack. "Mr. Northrup." "Call me Ethan, please." "Ethan, then," she conceded. "It's not your concern." "Maybe not, but I've seen enough in this world to know when someone needs help, even if they can't ask for it." Hannah's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. "No one can help me. This is my life now." "It doesn't have to be," he said quietly. Before she could respond, the sound of another horse approaching cut through their conversation. Hannah's blood ran cold as she recognized the distinctive cadence of Victor's stallion. "You need to go," she whispered urgently. "Now, please." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he nodded, replacing his hat. "I'll be at the boarding house in town if you need anything. Anything at all, Mrs. Gardner." "Hannah," she said impulsively. "My name is Hannah." He swung onto his horse just as Victor's stallion came into view around the bend. "Remember what I said, Hannah." With that, he rode toward Victor, tipping his hat as they passed. Hannah held her breath, but Victor merely glared at the stranger before continuing toward the house. "Who the hell was that?" Victor demanded as he dismounted, his movements unsteady. He'd been drinking already, never a good sign. "A traveler looking for work," Hannah replied, trying to keep her voice level. "He asked for directions to the Blackwater Ranch." Victor grunted, apparently accepting her explanation. "Get inside. I need food before I sleep off this head." Hannah cast one last glance at Ethan's retreating figure before following her husband into the house, the weight of her situation pressing down heavier than ever. The next few days passed in a fragile peace. Victor, recovering from his bender, kept mostly to himself, riding out early to check on the cattle and returning late. Hannah moved through her chores mechanically, but her mind constantly returned to her conversation with Ethan Northrup. It doesn't have to be. Such a simple statement, yet it had cracked open a door Hannah had thought permanently sealed. Could she really find a way out? And if so, where would she go? What would she do? On the fourth morning, Hannah was hanging laundry when she heard riders approaching. Shading her eyes against the sun, she recognized Victor's foreman, Travis, accompanied by two ranch hands. "Morning, Mrs. Gardner," Travis called, removing his hat. "Is the boss around?" "He rode out to the north pasture at dawn," Hannah replied. "Is something wrong?" Travis dismounted, looking uncomfortable. "We've got trouble at the south boundary. Looks like someone cut the fence in 3 places. Cattle are scattered halfway to Promise Creek." Hannah frowned. "That's strange. Who would do such a thing?" "Don't know, madam, but there's something else." Travis glanced at the other men before continuing. Blackwater Ranch just hired a bunch of new hands. One of them's that stranger who was in town the other day. Northrup, I think his name is. Hannah's heart quickened, though she kept her expression neutral. I don't see what that has to do with our fences. Just seems mighty coincidental, is all. He shows up and suddenly we've got trouble. Travis replaced his hat. We'll head out to find the boss. You take care now, Mrs. Gardner. As they rode away, Hannah returned to her laundry with trembling hands. Surely Ethan wouldn't have done something like that. But a small, selfish part of her was glad to know he was still nearby, working at the neighboring ranch. That evening, Victor returned in a rage. Blackwater, he spat, throwing his hat across the room. Those bastards cut my fence. 20 head missing, maybe more. Hannah set his dinner on the table, careful to stay out of arm's reach. How do you know it was them? Who else would it be? Victor downed a glass of whiskey in one swallow. And they just hired that drifter who was here the other day. Probably sent him to scout our place before they made their move. Maybe it was just vandals, Hannah suggested, immediately regretting it when Victor's eyes narrowed. Taking their side now? He stood, advancing on her. What exactly did you and that cowboy talk about when he was here? Nothing, Hannah said, backing away. He just asked directions, like I told you. Victor grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the same spots that had only just begun to fade from yellow back to normal. You're lying to me. I can always tell when you're lying. The familiar fear rose in Hannah's throat. Victor, please. His hand struck her face with enough force to send her sprawling against the wall. Don't you, Victor, please me. You've been looking at me different ever since that stranger showed up. What did he say to you? Hannah tasted blood where her lip had split. Nothing, I swear. Victor hauled her up by her hair. I've given you everything. A roof, food, clothes. And this is how you repay me? By making eyes at some drifter? I didn't. The second blow caught her across the cheekbone, sending stars exploding behind her eyes. Victor had never hit her this hard before, and for the first time, Hannah felt real fear that he might not stop. Victor, she gasped, raising her hands to protect her face. Stop, please. But he was beyond hearing, consumed by whiskey and jealousy. His hands closed around her throat, and panic surged through her as her airway constricted. You're mine, he growled, his face inches from hers. No one else gets to look at you, talk to you, touch you. Do you understand? Hannah clawed at his hands, desperate for air. The edges of her vision began to darken, and a terrible certainty formed in her mind. He was going to kill her this time. With the last of her strength, she reached behind her, fingers scrabbling on the small table where she'd set his dinner. Her hand closed around the handle of his steak knife, and without conscious thought, she brought it forward in a desperate arc. Victor's eyes widened in shock as the blade sank into his shoulder. His grip loosened enough for Hannah to wrench free, gasping for air. Blood blossomed across his shirt as he staggered backward. You stabbed me, he said, his voice incredulous. You actually stabbed me. Terror and adrenaline coursed through Hannah. She'd crossed a line there was no coming back from. I'm sorry, she whispered, though she wasn't. Not really. Victor's shock gave way to a cold fury that terrified her more than his hot rage had. You'll be sorry, all right, he said, advancing again despite the knife protruding from his shoulder. When I'm done with you, Hannah ran. Out the kitchen door, across the yard toward the barn. Behind her she heard Victor cursing, his heavy footsteps giving chase. She'd never outrun him, not with his long stride, But if she could reach her mare, a hand caught her dress, yanking her backward. Hannah screamed as she fell, Victor looming over her. "No more running," he snarled, reaching down to grab her again. The crack of a rifle shot split the night air. Victor froze, then slowly turned toward the sound. Ethan Northrup sat on his horse at the edge of the yard, rifle raised. "Step away from her," he called, his voice carrying clear in the still night. Victor's laugh was ugly. "This is my property, mister, and that's my wife. You're trespassing." "Maybe so," Ethan replied evenly, dismounting but keeping the rifle trained on Victor. "But I'm not leaving her alone with you." Hannah scrambled to her feet, backing away from her husband. Victor's shirt was soaked with blood now, but he seemed barely to notice the wound. "Hannah," Victor said, not taking his eyes off Ethan, "get in the house. This doesn't concern anyone but us." "I'm not going back in there," Hannah said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Not ever again." Victor's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful whore. After everything I've done for you." "You mean like those bruises on her neck?" Ethan cut in, stepping closer. "Or the ones on her arms? Or that split lip she's sporting right now?" "This is between me and my wife," Victor spat. "Not anymore." Ethan's gaze shifted to Hannah. "Are you all right?" She nodded, one hand at her throat where Victor's fingerprints were already forming. "She's coming with me," Ethan said to Victor, "and if you try to stop us, I'll put a bullet in you without losing a minute's sleep over it." Victor's hand moved toward the gun at his hip. "You think I'm afraid of you, boy?" "You should be," Ethan replied calmly, "because unlike you, I don't beat on those weaker than me. I save my fighting for men who deserve it." For a long moment, no one moved. Hannah held her breath, certain that blood would be spilled in the next instant. Then, incredibly, Victor's hand dropped away from his gun. "Take her," he said, his voice cold. "She's damaged goods anyway. But know this, you're both dead if I ever see either of you again." Ethan kept his rifle trained on Victor as he backed toward Hannah. "Get on my horse," he murmured. "Can you ride?" Hannah nodded, moving shakily toward the animal. With Ethan's help, she mounted. Then he swung up behind her, one arm securely around her waist. "This isn't over," Victor called as they rode away. "You hear me? This isn't over." His voice faded as they galloped into the night, and Hannah found herself trembling uncontrollably in Ethan's arms. "Easy," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe now. I've got you." "How did you know?" she managed through chattering teeth. "One of the Blackwater hands overheard your husband ranting in town about teaching you a lesson. I had a bad feeling." His arm tightened protectively around her. "Thank God I got there in time." Hannah leaned back against his solid chest, the adrenaline draining away and leaving her exhausted. "Where are we going?" "Blackwater Ranch for now. My boss is a good man. He'll help us figure out what to do next." "Us." The word echoed in Hannah's mind as they rode through the darkness. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone. The Blackwater Ranch main house was ablaze with light when they arrived, despite the late hour. As they approached, the front door swung open, and a tall, gray-haired man stepped onto the porch. "Northrup," he called, "what in tarnation's going on? Jackson said you tore out of here like the devil himself was on your heels." Ethan helped Hannah dismount, supporting her when her legs threatened to buckle. "Mr. Blackwater, this is Hannah Gardner. She needs help." Samuel Blackwater took one look at Hannah's bruised face and understood immediately. "Bring her inside." The ranch house was warm and welcoming, smelling of coffee and wood smoke. Hannah felt out of place in her dirty dress, her hair in disarray, but Mrs. Blackwater, a kind-faced woman with silver-streaked dark hair, took one look at her and swept her under her wing. "You poor dear," she clucked, leading Hannah to a chair by the fire. "Samuel, fetch my medicine box, and Ethan, tell Marta to heat water for a bath." Within the hour, Hannah found herself cleaned, her wounds tended, dressed in a borrowed nightgown, and sitting at the Blackwaters' kitchen table with a steaming mug of tea between her hands. Ethan had explained the situation in low tones to Mr. Blackwater, while Mrs. Blackwater, "Call me Elizabeth, dear," had helped Hannah bathe and change. "You'll stay here as long as you need to," Samuel Blackwater said firmly. "Gardner has no right to treat any living creature the way he treated you." "He'll come looking for me," Hannah said, her voice small. "He won't let this go." "Let him come," Ethan growled from his position by the door. "I'd welcome the chance to finish what we started." "There'll be none of that talk at my table," Elizabeth admonished gently. "Violence doesn't solve violence." She turned to Hannah. "Dear, do you have family you could go to?" Hannah shook her head. "No one. My parents died 2 years ago." "Then you'll stay with us," Elizabeth decided. "I've been needing help around the house anyway." "I couldn't impose—" "It's no imposition," Samuel interrupted. "Elizabeth's been after me to hire household help for months. Consider yourself employed, if you're willing." Hannah looked around at these strangers who had taken her in without question, offering safety and kindness when she needed it most. Her eyes lingered on Ethan, who had risked his life to save hers. "Thank you," she whispered. "All of you." Later, settled in a comfortable guest room, Hannah stood at the window looking out at the star-filled sky. A soft knock came at her door. "Come in," she called, expecting Elizabeth with an extra blanket or some such thing. Instead, Ethan entered, carrying a small bundle. "I thought you might need these," he said, placing the package on the bed. "Some of Elizabeth's things. She said to tell you there's a dress you can wear tomorrow until we can get your belongings from the Gardner place." "I'm not sure I have anything worth retrieving," Hannah admitted. "Besides, Victor will be watching for us." "I'll go," Ethan said simply. "Make a list of what you need and I'll fetch it." Hannah studied him in the lamplight. "Why are you doing this, Ethan? You don't even know me." He was quiet for a moment, his storm-gray eyes serious. "When I was 10 years old, I watched my father beat my mother until she couldn't stand. Did it regularly for years. No one ever stepped in to help her. Not the neighbors, not the sheriff. No one. She died from one of those beatings, and I swore that if I ever saw another woman in that situation, I wouldn't stand by and do nothing." Hannah's heart ached for the boy he'd been. "I'm so sorry about your mother." Ethan shrugged, though the pain in his eyes belied the casual gesture. "It was a long time ago, but when I saw those bruises on your arms that day in town, I knew, and I couldn't just ride away." Hannah moved closer to him, close enough to see the stubble on his jaw, the tiny scar above his left eyebrow. "You're a good man, Ethan Northrup." "I try to be." His voice had dropped to a near whisper. "Get some rest, Hannah. You're safe here." As he turned to leave, Hannah reached out impulsively, catching his hand. "Thank you for saving my life." Ethan's fingers closed around hers for a brief electric moment. "Sleep well, Hannah." After he'd gone, Hannah touched her fingers where his had held them, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire burning in the grate. For the first time in 3 years, she fell asleep without fear. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Samuel Blackwater rode into Promise Creek with 2 ranch hands to speak with the sheriff about filing charges against Victor. Ethan and another cowboy named Jackson headed to the Gardner ranch to retrieve Hannah's personal items. Elizabeth kept Hannah busy helping with household chores, clearly understanding that idle hands would only leave room for worry. "How long have you known the Blackwaters?" Hannah asked as they kneaded bread dough side by side in the spacious kitchen. "Samuel and I have been married 30 years, Elizabeth replied, her hands never pausing in the rhythmic work. "We came out here from Boston when this was barely civilized territory. Built this ranch from nothing but dreams and hard work." "It's a beautiful place," Hannah said sincerely. The Blackwater Ranch was one of the largest in the territory, with a sprawling main house, bunkhouse, barns, and corrals spread across hundreds of acres. "It is now. Wasn't always." Elizabeth smiled at some distant memory. "There were times I thought we'd never make it. Drought, blizzards, rustlers, even a fire that nearly took everything 10 years back. But Samuel never gave up, and neither did I." Hannah pondered this as she worked the dough. "How did you know he was the right one, if you don't mind my asking?" Elizabeth glanced at her knowingly. "Thinking about a certain cowboy, are we?" Hannah blushed. "No, it's all right, dear. I've seen the way he looks at you." Elizabeth wiped flour from her hands. "Samuel was different from other men I'd known. He listened when I spoke, valued my thoughts and opinions, never tried to make himself bigger by making me smaller." She paused. "And when he touched me, it was always with gentleness and respect." Hannah thought of Victor's bruising grip, contrasted with Ethan's careful hands helping her onto his horse. "I made such a terrible mistake with Victor." "We all make mistakes, child. It's what we do afterward that defines us." Elizabeth patted her shoulder. "And from where I'm standing, you're showing remarkable courage." Late in the afternoon, hoofbeats announced the return of the men. Hannah hurried to the porch, heart racing when she saw Ethan leading her mare, saddlebags bulging with her possessions. "Any trouble?" Elizabeth asked as the men dismounted. "None," Ethan replied, handing the reins to a stable boy. "Place was deserted. Looks like Gardner cleared out in a hurry." Hannah frowned. "That doesn't sound like Victor." "Sheriff Tanner thinks he probably headed for Billings," Samuel added, joining them on the porch. "Apparently he withdrew all his money from the bank this morning and was seen riding east." A mixture of relief and unease washed over Hannah. It seemed too easy, Victor giving up and running away. It wasn't like him at all. "I managed to get most of your clothes," Ethan said, bringing the saddlebags to her. "And this." He held out a small wooden box that Hannah recognized immediately, her mother's jewelry box containing the few precious keepsakes she had left of her parents. "Thank you," she whispered, taking it reverently. "This means more than you know." Ethan's smile warmed his eyes. "I thought it might." Over the next 2 weeks, Hannah settled into life at the Blackwater Ranch. She worked alongside Elizabeth in the house, learning to manage a household much larger than the small cabin she'd shared with Victor. The nightmares that had plagued her first few nights gradually lessened, though she still startled at unexpected noises. Ethan, she discovered, had been working for the Blackwaters for only a month. He'd drifted west from Kansas, where he'd grown up, working ranches along the way. He was 35 years older than Hannah, with a quiet competence that had quickly earned him a position as one of Samuel's trusted hands. They often found themselves sharing the evening meal on the back porch after the others had gone inside, talking long into the night. Hannah learned about his childhood in Kansas, his years working cattle drives, his dream of someday having a small spread of his own. In turn, she told him about growing up the daughter of a struggling farmer, about her parents' deaths, about how Victor had seemed like safety and security when he'd begun courting her. "I was so young," she confessed one evening, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. 21, naive, desperate after losing my parents. He was established, respected in the community. I thought I was so lucky. "You couldn't have known what he was," Ethan said gently. "There were signs," Hannah admitted. "Little things at first. Getting angry if I spoke to other men, criticizing what I wore, how I talked. By the time he first hit me, 6 months after we were married, I was already so beaten down inside that I believed I deserved it." Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "You never deserved any of it, Hannah, not for a second." She glanced at him, noting the controlled anger in his expression. "Have you heard anything more about him, Victor?" "Sheriff checked with the authorities in Billings. No sign of him there." Ethan hesitated. "Hannah, I don't want to worry you, but I don't think he's gone for good." She sighed, having come to the same conclusion herself. "Neither do I." "Whatever happens, you're not alone anymore," Ethan said firmly. "Remember that." As June melted into July, Hannah found herself laughing more easily, sleeping more soundly. The bruises Victor had left faded completely, though she knew the internal scars would take much longer to heal. She began riding out with Elizabeth to picnic by the creek that ran through the property, rediscovering simple pleasures she'd forgotten were possible. And through it all, there was Ethan. His presence in her life grew more essential with each passing day. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how he always seemed to anticipate when she needed help without making her feel helpless, the gentle brush of his hand against hers when they walked together in the evening. One afternoon, as Hannah hung laundry in the yard, she heard the thundering of multiple horses approaching fast. She shaded her eyes, seeing a group of riders galloping toward the ranch house. Samuel emerged from the barn, rifle in hand, as they drew closer. "It's all right," he called to Hannah, lowering his weapon. "It's Sheriff Tanner." The sheriff and his deputies reined in their lathered horses, dust swirling around them. "Blackwater," Tanner nodded. "Madam," he added to Hannah, "what brings you out here in such a hurry, Sheriff?" Samuel asked. "Looking for Northrup," Tanner replied grimly. "Is he around?" Hannah's heart stuttered. "What's wrong? Has something happened?" The sheriff's expression was grave. "Victor Gardner was found dead this morning, shot in the back just outside of town." The world seemed to tilt beneath Hannah's feet. "Dead? But where's Northrup?" Tanner repeated. "He rode out at dawn with some of the hands to check the North Range," Samuel replied. "What does Ethan have to do with Gardner's death?" "Witness saw a man matching his description near where the body was found," one of the deputies put in. "And everyone knows there's bad blood between them after what happened with Mrs. Gardner here." Hannah found her voice. "Ethan wouldn't do that. He wouldn't shoot anyone in the back." "Maybe, maybe not," Tanner said, "but I need to question him all the same." "He'll be back by sundown," Samuel said firmly. "You're welcome to wait, Sheriff, but I'll vouch for Northrup's character myself." The hours until evening stretched endlessly. Hannah moved through her chores in a daze, her mind racing. Victor, dead. After years of fearing him, hating him, and finally fleeing him, he was gone. She should have felt relieved, but instead cold dread had settled in her stomach. If someone had made it look like Ethan was responsible. The sun was low on the horizon when riders appeared in the distance. Hannah recognized Ethan immediately. His tall figure, unmistakable even at a distance. Sheriff Tanner and his men moved to intercept the returning ranch hands before they reached the house. Hannah couldn't hear what was said, but she saw Ethan's posture stiffen as the sheriff spoke to him. After a brief conversation, Ethan dismounted and handed his reins to another cowboy. The sheriff's deputies closed in around him. Hannah rushed forward as they approached the house. "Ethan, what's happening?" His eyes found hers, steady and calm despite the gravity of the situation. "It's all right, Hannah. The sheriff just has some questions for me." "They can't possibly think you killed Victor," she said, her voice rising. "That's exactly what we think, madam," Tanner interjected. "Northrup here had motive, opportunity, and a witness places him near the scene." "What witness?" Samuel demanded, joining them. "Man named Lyle Harmon," one of the deputies supplied. "Says he saw Northrup riding away from where Gardner's body was found, just after dawn yesterday." Hannah gasped. "Lyle Harmon? He was Victor's friend. He's lying." "That's for a judge to decide," Tanner said firmly. "I'm taking Northrup in for questioning. If he's innocent, he has nothing to worry about." "I didn't kill Gardner," Ethan said calmly. "I was here all day yesterday working with Jackson and the others. They'll tell you the same." "We'll sort it all out in town," Tanner replied. "Come along now." As the deputies led Ethan toward their horses, he looked back at Hannah. "Don't worry," he called. "This will all get cleared up." But Hannah could see the concern behind his reassuring words. In a territory where justice often came at the end of a rope, an accusation like this, especially against a drifter with no roots in the community, could be a death sentence. Samuel put a steadying hand on her shoulder as they watched the group ride away. "I'm going to town first thing tomorrow with the men who were with Ethan yesterday. Their testimony should clear this up." Hannah nodded, but fear had taken root in her heart. She knew how these things could go wrong, how quickly frontier justice could turn into frontier vengeance, and she couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, even in death, Victor was reaching out to punish her for daring to seek happiness. That night was the longest of Hannah's life. She paced her room until dawn, then dressed hurriedly when she heard movement in the house. Samuel was preparing to ride into town with 3 ranch hands who had worked with Ethan the day of Victor's murder. "I'm coming with you," Hannah announced. Samuel frowned. "Hannah, a jail is no place for a lady." "I don't care," she replied firmly. "Ethan risked everything to help me. I won't sit here while he's in trouble." After a brief argument, Samuel relented, and Hannah found herself riding toward Promise Creek as the sun crested the eastern hills. The town was unusually busy for early morning, with knots of people gathered outside the sheriff's office and saloon. "Something's wrong," Samuel muttered as they dismounted in front of the jail. Inside they found Sheriff Tanner looking haggard as though he hadn't slept. "Blackwater," he acknowledged wearily. "Mrs. Gardner." "We've come to give testimony about Northrup's whereabouts the day of the murder," Samuel said without preamble. "Where is he?" Tanner's expression turned grim. "He's gone." Hannah's heart lurched. "What do you mean, gone? Did you release him?" "No, madam. There was an incident last night. A group of men, friends of Gardner's, tried to break into the jail, said they were going to save the county the trouble of a trial." "A lynch mob," Samuel said flatly. Tanner nodded. "I held them off, but during the commotion, Northrup managed to get out of his cell. He's escaped." Hannah sank onto a nearby bench, legs suddenly unable to support her. Ethan was gone, running from a murder charge, a fugitive. This was so much worse than she'd feared. "Did he say anything before he left?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tanner hesitated, then seemed to relent at the desperation in her face. "Just one thing. He said to tell you he'd be back when he could prove his innocence, and to be careful that Gardner's death wasn't what it seemed." Hannah's mind raced. What did that mean? What had Ethan suspected? "We still want to give our statements," Samuel insisted. "These men were with Northrup all day when Gardner was killed. He couldn't have done it." Tanner sighed. "I'll take your statements, but it might not matter now that he's run. Some will see that as proof of guilt." As the ranch hands gave their accounts of working alongside Ethan the day of the murder, Hannah stared out the jail window at the dusty main street. Somewhere out there, Ethan was alone, hunted, trying to clear his name, and she was here, helpless to aid him. Or was she? Ethan had saved her when she couldn't save herself. Perhaps now it was her turn to help him. "Sheriff," she interrupted suddenly, "who found Victor's body?" Tanner looked up from his notes. "Harmon, Lyle Harmon, said he was riding to check on some strays when he came across Gardner's body just off the North Trail." "The same Harmon who claims he saw Ethan near the scene?" Hannah pressed. "One and the same," Tanner confirmed, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Why do you ask?" "Because Lyle Harmon hated me," Hannah said quietly. "He wanted our ranch, had been trying to convince Victor to sell to him for years." Samuel's eyebrows rose. "You think Harmon killed Gardner?" "I don't know," Hannah admitted. "But it seems convenient that he's both the one who found the body and the only witness placing Ethan at the scene." Tanner rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "It's something to consider, but without evidence." "Then we'll find evidence," Hannah said with newfound determination. "Where is Harmon now?" "Probably at his place east of town," Tanner replied. "But Mrs. Gardner, I have to advise against getting involved in this investigation. It could be dangerous." Hannah straightened her shoulders. "With all due respect, Sheriff, Danger and I are well acquainted by now." After leaving the sheriff's office, Hannah convinced Samuel to take her to the scene where Victor's body had been found. It was a lonely spot on the North Trail, marked only by a dark stain on the ground where her husband had bled out after being shot. "What exactly are we looking for?" Samuel asked as Hannah carefully examined the area. "I'm not sure," she admitted, scanning the ground. "Anything that might tell us what really happened." They searched for nearly an hour, finding nothing but hoofprints too numerous and trampled to yield any useful information. Hannah was about to admit defeat when a glint of metal caught her eye from the base of a nearby tree. Kneeling, she carefully extracted a small object half buried in the dirt, a distinctive silver cufflink with an engraved pattern she recognized immediately. "This is Lyle's," she breathed. "I've seen him wearing these many times when he came to the ranch." Samuel examined it. "Could have been dropped any time. Or it could have been lost during a struggle," Hannah countered. "We need to speak with Lyle." Samuel looked dubious. "Hannah, this is hardly proof of anything, and confronting a man you suspect of murder isn't the wisest course of action." "Then what do you suggest? That we let Ethan remain a fugitive while the real killer goes free?" After some argument, Samuel reluctantly agreed to accompany Hannah to Harmon's ranch, though he insisted they return to Blackwater first so he could gather some of his men. By late afternoon, they were riding toward the Harmon property, a modest spread east of Promise Creek. They found Lyle mending a corral fence, his expression darkening when he recognized Hannah. "Mrs. Gardner," he greeted coldly. "Blackwater, what brings you to my property?" "We have some questions about Victor's death," Hannah said directly. Lyle's eyes narrowed. "I've already told the sheriff everything I know. Saw that cowboy of yours riding away from the scene. Not much else to say." Hannah held out the silver cufflink. "Is this yours, Mr. Harmon?" For the briefest moment, uncertainty flickered across his face before his features hardened again. Lots of men have cufflinks like that. With your initials engraved on the back? Samuel asked mildly, turning the item to reveal the small LH etched into the silver. Lyle's hand moved imperceptibly toward his gun. Where did you find that? Near where Victor was killed, Hannah replied. Odd that you didn't mention losing it when you reported finding the body. This is ridiculous, Lyle blustered. You're accusing me based on a cufflink? I ride that trail all the time. Could have lost it any day. Maybe, Samuel agreed, but it does raise questions, like why a man would be wearing fancy cufflinks to check on strays in the first place. Lyle's eyes darted between them and the Blackwater ranch hands waiting a short distance away. I don't have to listen to this. Get off my property. Hannah took a deep breath. Victor was planning to sell you the ranch, wasn't he? That's what you really wanted all along. So what if he was? Lyle snapped. Nothing illegal about buying property. Except Victor changed his mind, Hannah pressed, following a hunch. After he found out I'd left, he decided not to sell after all. Maybe he thought he could win me back if he kept the ranch. A muscle twitched in Lyle's jaw. You don't know what you're talking about. But Hannah could see she'd struck close to the truth. You argued with him that morning, didn't you? It got heated. Maybe you didn't mean to kill him, but things went wrong. You can't prove anything, Lyle snarled, his hand now openly moving to his gun. I wouldn't, Samuel warned quietly, his own hand hovering near his weapon. Harmon, if you're innocent, ride back to town with us and clear this up with the sheriff. For a tense moment, it seemed Lyle might draw. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed a harsh, barking sound devoid of humor. You think you're so clever, don't you, Hannah? Always did. Victor said you thought too highly of yourself. What happened that morning, Lyle? Hannah asked softly. Lyle's face twisted. He was supposed to sign the papers. We had a deal. Then he shows up saying he's changed his mind, that maybe with you gone he could expand the ranch instead of selling. His laugh turned bitter. All because of you. Even when you'd run off with another man, he was still obsessed with proving something to you. So you shot him, Samuel stated flatly. It wasn't planned, Lyle muttered, his eyes growing distant. We argued. He turned to leave. I was angry all those months of negotiating, wasted. I drew my gun just to scare him. But then he laughed at me, said I'd never have the guts to use it. His expression hardened. No one laughs at me. Hannah closed her eyes briefly, the confirmation of her suspicions bringing no joy. And then you tried to frame Ethan. That part was easy, Lyle admitted, seeming almost proud now that his story was coming out. Everyone knew he'd interfered between you and Victor. All I had to do was mention seeing him near the body. The town was ready to believe the worst of a drifter who'd stolen another man's wife. Except I wasn't stolen, Hannah said firmly, and Ethan is innocent. For now, Lyle growled, his hand closing around his gun butt. But accidents happen to fugitives all the time. Before he could draw, the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked cut through the air. All eyes turned to the ridge above the corral, where Ethan Northrup sat on his horse, weapon trained on Lyle. That's far enough, Harmon, he called, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. Take your hand away from that gun, slowly. Relief flooded through Hannah at the sight of him, dusty and unshaven, but very much alive. Ethan! Lyle's face contorted with rage. You're supposed to be halfway to the territories by now. And let you get away with murder? Ethan replied evenly, guiding his horse down the slope. I've been tracking you since I got out of that jail. Figured you'd slip up eventually. His eyes met Hannah's briefly. "I just didn't expect you to beat me to it." Sheriff Tanner and his deputies crested the ridge where Ethan had appeared, having followed at a distance. "We heard everything, Harmon," Tanner called. "It's over." What happened next unfolded in heartbeats. Lyle, seeing himself cornered, drew his gun in a desperate move. Samuel shoved Hannah to safety as shots rang out. When the dust settled, Lyle Harmon lay motionless on the ground, and Ethan was dismounting, rifle still raised. "Everyone all right?" he asked, eyes scanning the group before settling on Hannah with visible relief. "We're fine," Samuel confirmed, helping Hannah to her feet. "Nice shooting, Northrup." It wasn't until later that Hannah learned it had been the sheriff's bullet, not Ethan's, that had struck Lyle down. The ride back to Promise Creek was quiet, each person lost in their own thoughts. Hannah kept stealing glances at Ethan, still hardly believing he was there, that the nightmare was truly ending. When they reached the sheriff's office, Tanner officially cleared Ethan of all charges related to Victor's death, based on Lyle's confession and the eyewitness accounts of the Blackwater hands. "You're a free man, Northrup," Tanner said, extending his hand. "Sorry for the trouble." Ethan shook it firmly. "You were doing your job, Sheriff." As they left the jail, stepping into the golden light of late afternoon, Hannah found herself suddenly shy in Ethan's presence. He looked tired, with several days' growth of beard and dust from the trail covering his clothes, but his eyes were as clear and steady as ever when they met hers. "You came back," she said softly. "I told you I would." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the tiny flecks of blue in his gray eyes. "I couldn't leave you, Hannah, not with things unsettled between us." Her heart quickened. "What things?" Instead of answering, Ethan reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You know, don't you? You must know by now." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. "Say it anyway, please." "I love you," he said simply, his voice low and certain. "Have since the moment I saw you trying to be brave in that general store with bruises you were working so hard to hide. I love your strength, your kindness, your determination." His thumb traced her cheekbone, now healed from Victor's last blow. "And I swear to you, Hannah, no one lays hands on you again, not in anger, not ever." The tears spilled over then, happiness and relief and a love she'd barely allowed herself to acknowledge rushing to the surface. "I love you too," she whispered. "But Ethan, are you sure? After everything that's happened?" He silenced her doubts with a kiss, gentle at first, then deepening as she responded. His arms encircled her, strong but tender, holding her as though she were precious beyond measure. When they finally parted, both breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." 3 months later, on a crisp October morning, Hannah stood in Elizabeth Blackwater's bedroom, admiring her reflection in the full-length mirror. The wedding dress, Elizabeth's own, carefully altered to fit Hannah's smaller frame, was simple but elegant, its ivory satin glowing in the autumn sunlight. "You look beautiful," Elizabeth said warmly, adjusting the small wreath of wildflowers in Hannah's hair. "Ethan won't know what hit him." Hannah smiled, hardly recognizing the woman in the mirror, cheeks flushed with happiness, eyes bright with anticipation, not a shadow of fear anywhere to be found. "I still can't believe this is happening." "Believe it," Elizabeth said firmly. "You deserve every happiness, my dear. Both of you do." A knock came at the door, and Samuel entered, resplendent in his best suit. "Ladies, The minister is ready, and I believe we have a nervous groom waiting." Hannah took a deep breath. "Then we shouldn't keep him waiting any longer." Samuel offered his arm. "It would be my honor to give you away, Hannah, if you'll have me." Tears pricked Hannah's eyes as she took his arm. "I can't think of anyone I'd rather have." The small chapel in Promise Creek was filled with friends from the Blackwater Ranch and townspeople who, over the past months, had come to know and respect Hannah for her quiet dignity and kindness. As she walked down the aisle on Samuel's arm, her eyes found Ethan waiting for her at the altar. He stood tall and handsome in a new suit, his usually unruly hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving hers as she approached. The love in his gaze was so palpable it nearly took her breath away. When Samuel placed her hand in Ethan's, she felt the familiar, gentle strength of his fingers closing around hers, a touch that had only ever brought comfort and safety. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, but Hannah barely heard the words that followed, lost in the moment and the man before her. When it came time for their vows, Ethan's voice was clear and unwavering. "Hannah, I take you as my wife, promising to love, honor, and cherish you all the days of my life. Your strength has shown me what courage truly is. Your heart has taught me what love can be." He squeezed her hand gently. "I promise to stand beside you, never above you or against you, to be your partner, your friend, and your shelter in any storm that comes our way." Hannah's voice trembled slightly as she replied, "Ethan, I take you as my husband, promising to love, honor, and cherish you all the days of my life. You saw me when I was invisible, and valued me when I'd forgotten my own worth." Her voice strengthened. "I promise to trust in your goodness, to believe in our future, and to remember each day that love is a choice we make together." The simple gold bands they exchanged had been purchased with the first profits from their new venture, a small horse ranch on land purchased from Samuel Blackwater, where they would build a life together, breeding and training the finest quarter horses in the territory. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Ethan's hands framed her face with infinite tenderness as he lowered his lips to hers, sealing their vows with a kiss that promised a lifetime of gentle touches and unwavering respect. The celebration afterward at the Blackwater Ranch was joyous and heartfelt. As twilight descended, lanterns were lit around the yard and musicians struck up a lively tune. Ethan led Hannah onto the makeshift dance floor, drawing her close as they swayed to the music. "Happy, Mrs. Northrup?" he murmured against her hair. "Completely," she replied, looking up at him with a smile that reached her eyes, "though I'm not used to the name yet." "We've got a lifetime for you to practice," he reminded her, spinning her gently before pulling her back into his arms. Later, as guests began to depart, Elizabeth approached with a small package wrapped in blue paper. "A wedding gift," she explained, pressing it into Hannah's hands. "Open it when you're alone together." At dusk, Ethan and Hannah rode to their new home, a small cabin on their property that the Blackwater hands had helped build over the past months. Simple but solidly constructed, it represented everything Hannah had once thought beyond her reach: safety, independence, and love freely given. Inside, a fire had been laid in the hearth, and fresh flowers adorned the table. Ethan lit the lamps while Hannah moved through the rooms, still somewhat amazed that this place was truly theirs. "What did Elizabeth give you?" Ethan asked, noticing the package she still carried. Hannah unwrapped it carefully, revealing a leather-bound journal and a letter. She read the note aloud. Dear Hannah and Ethan, this journal was my companion during our first years in this territory. In it, I recorded our struggles and triumphs, our fears and hopes. Now I pass it to you to begin your own story, one that I know will be filled with the kind of love that grows stronger with each passing year. With deepest affection, Elizabeth. Ethan moved behind her, arms encircling her waist as they looked at the blank pages that followed Elizabeth's filled ones. A new beginning, he murmured. Hannah leaned back against his solid chest, savoring the security of his embrace. Our beginning. That night, in the quiet darkness of their new home, Ethan's hands left no bruises as they traced patterns of devotion across her skin. Each touch was a promise kept, each kiss a vow renewed. And Hannah, who had once believed love to be a prison, discovered instead that true love was the most profound freedom of all. 5 years later, Hannah stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching Ethan teaching their 4-year-old son, Samuel, to sit on his first pony. Their daughter, Elizabeth, just 2, balanced on Hannah's hip, clapping her tiny hands as her brother tentatively took the reins. "Gentle hands, Sam," Ethan called. "Remember what I told you? Horses can feel everything you're thinking through your hands." Hannah smiled, remembering how Ethan had taught her the same lesson when they'd started their breeding program. Now, Northrup Quarter Horses was becoming known throughout the territory for their quality stock, particularly the line descended from the mare. Ethan had gifted Hannah on their first anniversary a magnificent chestnut they'd named Second Chance. "Mama, down!" Elizabeth demanded, wriggling in Hannah's arms. Hannah set her daughter on her feet, watching as she toddled determinedly toward her father and brother, her dark curls bouncing with each step. Ethan scooped her up before she could startle the pony, swinging her high in the air as she squealed with delight. "You'll have your turn soon enough, little miss," he promised, settling her on his shoulders. Hannah's heart swelled as she watched them, her family, created in love and raised with gentle hands. The bruises of her past had long since faded, leaving only the occasional nightmare that Ethan would soothe away with whispered reassurances in the darkness. She thought sometimes of Victor and the life she might have led had Ethan not intervened that night. It seemed like another lifetime now, a dark fairy tale with a happy ending she hadn't dared to hope for. As if sensing her thoughts, Ethan looked up, catching her eye across the yard. The love that passed between them needed no words. It was in the air they breathed, the life they'd built, the children they were raising to know that strength came not from dominance, but from kindness. Ethan set Elizabeth down beside Samuel, adjusting the boy's small hands on the reins once more, before walking toward Hannah. When he reached her, he pulled her into an embrace, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "What are you thinking about, looking so serious?" he asked softly. Hannah smiled up at him, tracing the laugh lines that had formed at the corners of his eyes over their years together. "Just counting my blessings," she replied, "and thinking that some promises are actually kept." Ethan's hands, the hands that had only ever touched her with love, cupped her face gently. "Always," he whispered, before kissing her with the same tenderness he'd shown on their wedding day. Behind them, their children's laughter rang out in the clear Montana air, the sweetest music Hannah had ever known, and the soundtrack to a life reclaimed, a love hard won, and a future limited only by the far horizon.